Hour. Today on Mushroom Hour, we have the extraordinary honor of interviewing William Padilla-Brown, founder of MycoSymbiotics. William is a social entrepreneur, a citizen scientist, a mycologist, amateur phychologist, urban shaman, writer, YouTube vlogger, contributing editor for Fungi magazine, a researcher, a poet, and maybe most importantly, a father. William holds permaculture design certificates acquired through Susquehanna Permaculture and NGOZI. William is leading the country in the field of cordyceps cultivation, and I consider him one of the main figures who awakened our culture to the potentials of these zombie fungi, especially when it comes to Cordyceps militaris. His cordyceps cultivation handbook transformed my own personal appreciation for fungi and opened new doors for my own citizen science exploration. William regularly teaches at mushroom clubs around the country, at festivals, at agricultural conferences, and more. Ever since his days as apex grower on YouTube, Mr. Padilla has been inspiring folks to explore science, get back to the land, and to always propagate and myceliate. Will, it's an honor to have you on the show.
An honor to be here. I'm super excited.
Thank you for making the time. You were one of those people that really opened my brain to the potentials of mushrooms and fungi. I didn't even know what cordyceps were until one of my friends showed me your videos on YouTube, and it was those little tinfoil trays of cordyceps clubs shooting up that just sent me even more down a path of citizen science, especially when it comes to lab work and that kind of thing. So I think you've made it really approachable, and I'm excited to talk, about cordyceps, but all the other things you're into, and maybe about how all that translates to real positive social and economic change that I think is possible if we kind of embrace some of these principles, some of this knowledge. But I do want to get into a little bit where you came from, how you got into some of these topics, how you got into mushrooms.
So yeah, I dropped out of high school at 16. I was living in Taipei, Taiwan, and I moved back to the States and got my own apartment when I was 17. And I was living out on this mountain. I really wanted to move to the West Coast and grow cannabis, but I knew that the industry there was very competitive. And if I wanted to have any sort of advantage, I'd have to know how to grow plants very well. So I worked at a hydroponic store for a little bit, and I started teaching myself how to grow food because I didn't want to get in trouble. You can't be growing cannabis in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So I started growing a lot of different food, and through growing food, I got connected with the permaculture community in my area. I took an apprenticeship. I started learning about rewilding. I took a rewilding course. All of my teachers, I would see mushrooms in all of these like permaculture design gardens and like during the rewilding course. And my teachers couldn't tell me much about mushrooms. So I saw them able to come into more economic alleviation through teaching classes. And I figured if there was nobody teaching about mushrooms, if I was interested enough, I could probably figure out enough to teach people about it. And then I could hold that place as the person that educates about mushrooms in my area. Doing that quickly built up into another avalanche of circumstances that brought me to be very involved with the national mycological community and then now the international mycological community. So it's been a crazy journey, and I never would have thought this would happen. But I think following inquisitiveness or following your curiosity can really take you far.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to hear your story of starting out in Taipei. I had no idea you were living in Taipei, which is a really mycophilic culture.
Yeah.
I think you made the right move by not getting into cannabis, by the way. I'm here in Northern California. That's what everyone's trying to do now, and it's hyper competitive and it's just not that cutting edge a place to be. Whereas what you're doing with genetics and mushroom cultivation and education is a very cutting edge place to be right now. So I think that worked out for the best.
I owe a little bit of it to Alan Rockefeller. I met him back in like 2016, the first time that I taught at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. And I was sitting with him at this like after party thing. And I was like, so what got you into DNA and all this stuff? And he's like, because nobody was doing it. And I was like, yeah, that's the wave, like I want to do something that nobody's doing, So that was a really inspiring thing. It was just a very simple answer to a question that kind of pushed me to try things that were different that nobody was doing.
And actually, you inspired me. It might have been part of that story when you talked about mushrooms through the lens of like, when we grow up, we think kind of everything's discovered, everything's been done already, but mushrooms open this whole door to things that people aren't doing or aren't exploring enough. And so I had my similar epiphany moment. I was like, yeah, that's right. That's the reason why we all get passionate about it and get so into it, is because there is kind of this open area where people haven't already like codified things in any kind of rigid orthodoxy. There's room for exploration where you don't have to go through any like gatekeeping institution, that kind of thing. And your story speaks to that beautifully, and that you're someone who's an amateur who did not have an academic background into this, who really just dove in, followed passion, followed inquisitiveness, and have become a huge leading figure, like you said, in the international mushroom community. I mean, I'm seeing you now going to Costa Rica, doing stuff with the Fungi, fantastic Fungi movie. It's been amazing to watch your like evolution and progression.
Yeah, I'm still freaking out about all of it.
Hasn't caught up with you yet.
No, not at all.
So I want to dive into a little exploration of citizen science, kind of what that means to you, and then a little bit about how you developed the tangible skill set, like if it was mentors you had, if it was just trying things and learning what worked, internet, books, combination, all those things, but how you developed really that citizen science toolkit and got started in doing this research yourself.
Well, citizen science to me, if you want like a very like blunt definition, it's just individuals who are practicing the scientific method in non-traditional places. So a lot of people are doing different science in community laboratories. A lot of people are practicing science, the scientific method in their homes. So that's citizen science, but for me, taking science out of academia, out of big corporations, and practicing it as a community or practicing it from home really allows for rapid advancement. It's kind of like the open source model a little bit. When you have more people working on something, especially when it's non-traditional, because a lot of people that go through academia to learn science, they practice science in a specific way. So I think it's almost like children playing with things and like with their imagination, they're going to come to new ideas that you wouldn't if you were just following some rigid guideline. So I think the lack of background with citizen science is leading to a lot of innovation and leading to a lot of new discoveries. And that's something that I started to realize more in the field of mycology, which has been really adopted by citizen scientists and really adopted by people with more non-traditional backgrounds. And we're seeing such a rapid advancement in the way that people are growing mushrooms, in the way that people are working with fungi, that I don't think we would have seen if it was just all strictly following the guidelines of academia. So that's really what gets me stoked on citizen science. And as far as like developing the toolkit and the knowledge to know how to practice science, I always tell people I graduated from YouTube University. I got my GED and went straight to YouTube. So I learned a lot on the internet. I read a lot of books. Like I have a huge bookshelf behind me here, just like stacked to the brim with books. Yeah, I would just get into a nice stone meditative state, and just read and watch YouTube videos for hours. And when I would finish reading these books and like I'd watch all this stuff on YouTube, and I would immediately start doing what I was learning about. Like I didn't want to wait. Like I would immediately start practicing what I was learning about. And I started getting to the point where Google and YouTube and the books even couldn't answer my questions anymore. Like I had done the work in there and I was starting to come across questions that hadn't been answered at that point in time. So at that point, I felt it was necessary to seek out the people that I was learning from. So I wanted to meet the authors of the books and the people that made the YouTube videos that I was watching. So I think that all started with Trad Cotter, really. When I was doing my permaculture design certification course, you have to create an effective design to get your certificate. And my design was called non-traditional independent education systems for people that want a non-traditional independent approach to their education. So I set it up where I would crowdfund the resources to get me to these places so I could learn about things that weren't available in my area. And then I'd bring that back, apply it, and then start teaching about it to give back to the community that I crowdfunded the resources from. So that didn't really work out that well for me at first. A lot of people are like, why should I pay for you to go take a workshop? But like, there was one guy that really helped me out, and I just saw him at a PASA conference, and he paid for me to go to NOFA in New York, where that's where I met Trad. And it was like a funny story because like I was broke. Like I used to work at like an Asian restaurant as a server, like, and I had a kid when I was young, so all my money was like allotted. So I went up there, and it was a 3-night, 2-day thing. I didn't have a hotel room for the first night, so I was like staying in the hotel where the event was, just sitting in the lobby, just like waiting because it was cold. It was like January. And I was just sitting in there waiting. I was like, all right, I'm just going to wait till I get really tired. I'm going to go sleep in my car or whatever. Trad's plane came in late. So he just showed up in the lobby like real late at night. And I was like, yo, like that's the man I'm here for. Like this is the dude I came to see.
Synchronicity.
So we started talking then, and he let me interview him after his classes, and we started just keeping up with each other. I don't know what it is. I'm sure there was like hundreds of people that always wanted to be in contact with him, but yeah, his wife stayed in touch with me, and they started following my work. And when I started playing with the Cordyceps, he invited me to go teach at Telluride, where I met a whole bunch of other people. I met like a bunch of other scientists and stuff from different literature I was reading. But as far as mushrooms, Jay Schindler and Valerie over at Fungi for the People. That's the only class I ever did for mushroom cultivation, like in person. Everything else was just books and internet stuff. For the mushrooms, that's how I learned. And then once I started practicing lab work, and like I had went to Trad's lab, and like I'd been in a couple other mycological labs. I think it's funny, like when you're younger and you don't know about science, and you see like Dexter's Lab on TV, or you see like a lab on like some CSI show or whatever, you're like, oh, science, like that looks crazy. But like after you're like been in a lab, you're like, oh, I know what that is. And you'll be like catching stuff on like TV, like why do they even have that in there? That's like not even necessary, hilarious. Or like whatever. But once I knew what labs were about and like how like just like basic lab procedure, it was way easier for me to learn how to do other things in the lab. Once I knew how to like culture organisms, it was really easy to learn how to grow algae. I only like read like one book on algae, and there wasn't too many people that could really teach me. I did correspond a lot with Matthew Huber from Algae Research and Supply. And then when it came to the DNA stuff, I had watched Craig Tresser, NYC, do a couple DNA classes, but I mostly like I just sat on the internet for like 3 weeks and like taught myself how to run PCR. And if I had any questions, I would ask him, or I would ask Alan Rockefeller, and I figured out how to like run PCR and read gels and like send in my results for sequencing in like 3 weeks. And I started getting successful results like right after.
You know, you might be a savant, so maybe it's not something everyone could do. Like, oh, I just taught myself PCR in a couple weeks. But what you're describing does make it sound eminently approachable. And I think one key element that gets thrown in the mix here is like, yeah, have the passion. Outside of academia or someone telling you had to do something, you found something that really resonated and you were able to get really passionate about. And then taking action, reading books, watching YouTube, you know, then got to implement it. Even if it's not as perfect as what you're seeing laid out in the book or in the video, the act of trying to implement whatever you're learning about will teach you so much more. So I think that's key to that I want to transmit to people that I'm hearing in your story. Act on it. Like learn these new things, get really excited, find that fire, but then actually take the physical steps to try these things out. And that really accelerates this process. And maybe it is showing up, you know, at a conference and sitting in the hotel lobby and not being sure like exactly what's going to happen, but like, I know I need to be here. And that's when the synchronicity lines up and resources avail themselves to you if you kind of show up about something you're passionate about. Now, of course, you have some of the best resources in terms of mentors and people you know to continue your learning. And now you're kind of leading the way for a lot of people.
It's wild. I wouldn't say I'm leading the Cordyceps thing anymore. You know, I definitely like ran with that torch for a little bit, but I started this Cordyceps cultivation group on Facebook a while ago. And if you look on there, these guys are just taking it to whole new levels. You know, I'm just setting the guidelines for basic cultivation. Like I'm going to release this book as soon as I can figure out how to print it with all these business being closed and all this kind of stuff. But
right,
it's really exciting to see where this flame has gone, you know, like see it like raging on, you know.
You're able to light other people up. You turn someone on to these concepts and then they're way ahead of where I was. You know, someone finds the information. I mean, in your case, you're giving them a blueprint to get started. And then it's really inspiring to see where people go with it and how people grow and kind of take things to another level. In terms of Cordyceps, I guess, how did you first get turned on to Cordyceps? And we heard your story of you kind of getting into science. You were into a lot of things at once, it sounds like. Dove in with natural sciences, permaculture, phycology, all that stuff. So where did Cordyceps like really latch onto you?
I was like really into nutrition. I think I might have hid most of these videos, but if you go really far back on Apex Grower, my first videos were this series called Mixing Up Manna, where it was just like I was raw vegan and I was making like a bunch of like wild like raw vegan stuff. I don't recommend that diet for people, honestly, but if you're into it,
Oh,
then
I
good
was about
for
to
you.
get hyped with you over raw
Yeah.
vegan. Okay.
I personally wouldn't recommend it. I'm not knowledgeable enough to recommend that to somebody, but
Right,
like,
right.
because like I got really like underweight and like started like passing out a little bit and stuff from being raw vegan, and like
Well,
I
David
was,
Wolf makes it sound so cool.
yeah, I was about to bring him up, like
Yeah.
because that's how I got interested in cordyceps. That's why I was going to bring that up, but I used to like watch a lot of David Wolf, and like I went to go meet him at the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors up in New York, at Alex and Allison Gray's place, and he says some wild stuff sometimes. Like you got to be able to discern information with people. But I have a lot of respect for that guy and how he's turned a lot of people onto things. But he was talking about cordyceps and medicinal mushrooms and all this stuff, and like it was right when I was getting into mushrooms, and I was like, "What's up with these cordyceps? Like I want to work with cordyceps and all this kind of stuff." And then I was trying to find it, and I could only find like mycelium powders, which if you want to talk about that, we can. I think mycelium powders are cool, but I wanted access to both. Like I wanted access to mushrooms and mycelium powder. And all the mushrooms I could find were all these ones from China. And like, I got a bag of Chinese cordyceps at one point, and like I opened it and they were kind of damp and there was like mold in it and stuff. And I was like, hey, this is gross. I started hosting my mushroom festival in 2015. It used to be called Mycosymbiotics Mushroom and Arts Festival. It's like MycoFest now, just to shorten it up. Somebody gave us a pound of Chinese cordyceps fruiting bodies, and they were good. They were dry. They were clean. So we brewed a bunch of them and we're drinking it throughout the festival. And then my friend Charlie from Mush Love found the only cordyceps specimen of the whole weekend, because we do forays the whole time. And he gave it to me, and I was like, all right, crap. Like I'm gonna figure out how to grow this, And like I'm like posting on mushroom growing on Facebook and like asking everybody, and they're like, you're not gonna figure out how to grow those. It's like morels. Like nobody can grow cordyceps. Like only the
Right.
Chinese people know how to do it. And they're not sharing their information and all this stuff. So like I spent a lot of time on Google Scholar and found a couple research articles that were translated from Korea, and I watched so many hours of Asian YouTube videos of them cultivating cordyceps, trying to like mimic what they were doing, because I couldn't understand it. Like I only speak like enough Mandarin to like get a taxi and find a bathroom and order food and stuff like that. So like,
Right, right.
um,
Some of those videos are where people come up with like crazy theories of, you can't do it unless, you're running electricity through the substrate. I've heard all kinds of crazy things people get in their head from watching those videos. I'm interested to hear how like you gleaned real information from them.
well, it goes back to like once you're in the setting, you kind of understand it better. Like I didn't realize, like I'll post stuff on Instagram and stuff, and I didn't realize that people think like, oh wow, like, he's doing some real science stuff and da 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 da. Like to me, it's just like, oh, it's just what I'm like normally doing. Like it's nothing too crazy, But people look at it and they're like, oh, science. So
Right.
when I was watching these Asian videos, I already had some sort of understanding of mushroom cultivation. So like when I'm watching them do things, I'm like, oh, they're prepping a substrate. Oh, they're sterilizing it right now, and like, oh, they're doing their inoculation, because like they do everything like way different. Like it was, but like I got the basis of it, so I just started playing around with it. And my friend Ryan Gates was there the whole time. Like he was the only person that believed that we could do it. I gave away, like right now, if I offered free cordyceps cultures, multiple hundreds of people would hit me up
I'm
for like
in.
free,
Yeah.
But like when I got the first culture growing, only like 20 people asked for it. And Ryan was the only person that corresponded with me about it afterwards. And he had been in communication with Dr. Anon from Thailand, and he had a translated recipe that we used at first. Yeah, he got him to grow, and then I got him to grow, and then I think he was having some mite issues back then, and he kind of like chilled out with it for a little bit. But after I grew the first round, then I like did multi-spore and interstrain crosses, which means I bred it to itself. And then I got the first commercial cultures, so to speak. I would say first commercial cultures, but I think Mushroom Life, Michael Weiss had like the first commercial culture, so to speak, because when I first made my commercial culture, there was nobody else doing it.
How do define it as kind of a commercial culture?
Well, if you get a successful fruiting clone from the wild with cordyceps, it might produce like a gram per pint jar. So like
Okay, got it.
I based commercial culture off of yield from a
Yield.
pint jar. So a commercial culture should yield anywhere between 3 to 5 dry grams per pint jar. My first commercial culture was yielding an average of like 3.5 grams per pint jar. But whenever I made that, it still was like maybe 10 people were into it at that point. And then whenever Michael Weiss made his commercial culture, was right around the time that other people were starting to take it serious. Like, oh, this could be a business. It was like right around the time when I moved to North Carolina and set up an entire warehouse, which was the first large commercial production of cordyceps. Like, it was like I set that warehouse up to produce for wholesale and distribution. So when people saw that that was a possibility, then
everyone jumped on the train.
Cordyceps businesses, So, but like that's how I got interested in it. And I was always out looking for wild cordyceps after Charlie found that one, because I knew that, all right, they grow in Pennsylvania. And I maybe found like one. On a good year, I found 3. But then last year, I don't know if it was because more people were interested in it or if it was a really good year for cordyceps. It might have been both. But like, I found over 200 specimens. And like, if I had spent more time out there, I could probably find over 100 specimens in a day, because they're really, really abundant in certain areas out here. And I was really in awe of my friend Jeff. He lives out in Pittsburgh area. He runs Appalachian Gold. He was finding all sorts of cordyceps like way before I even thought the season started. And like, I was like, this guy knows so much. He knows how to find all these wild cordyceps.
And are these primarily Cordyceps militaris that you're finding out there?
Primarily, but I found 2 species last year that even experts couldn't identify what they were. So I wasn't into the DNA as much back then at that point in time. So I'll be able to hopefully find those again. I found Ophiocordyceps ravenelli, which grows on a June bug larva. I found that during a Memorial Day foray, so it's almost the time to even go find those again, right before the June bugs pop up. I sent that one over to Reishi Strauss over at Bastyr University. She tested it for cordycepin, which it didn't have any. If anybody doesn't know Reishi, definitely check her out. I met her in Seattle a couple years back when I was teaching for the club there, and we designed a research project on cordyceps that she eventually followed through with a different supplier, but she does really, really good work. But she found out the Ravenelli had adenosine but no cordycepin, and she ate it, and she said it had like mild psychoactive effects. I think that's something interesting to look into. But mostly Militaris. Militaris is super abundant, and Militaris is the most successful cordyceps on the planet because it can grow on over 40 different insect hosts. And I think maybe more. There's only like 36 described insect hosts, but they're mostly Asian insects, and we find them on at least 5 different insect hosts here in just the Northeast. So I'm sure it's like upwards of 45, 50 hosts.
As we get a few more years under our belt of more and more people exploring this, it's probably one of those things where we're going to find a whole new litany of hosts. And you mentioned 2 key compounds there, cordycepin and adenosine. Everyone knows it now as like this incredibly potent medicinal mushroom. And those, I think, are 2 of the primary compounds that give it a lot of that medicinal lore, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a DNA mushroom. It produces nucleobases that you can utilize for synthesizing DNA. It produces cordycepin, which is an adenosine-type molecule, very similar to adenosine triphosphate. That's just what's researched, though. Like, there's like lesser looked at research papers showing all sorts of other compounds in various cordyceps mushrooms. But with Cordyceps militaris, it has another really interesting compound that I think the light needs shined upon a little bit more. It's called cordynin. It's an antifungal compound, but it also, on its own and in conjunction with cordycepin, can inhibit HIV-1 reverse transcriptase, which means it can kind of stop the RNA replication of the virus. So that, I think, needs looked at a little bit more. And I think cordycepin is really like treated the same way people treat THC right now. They're like, cordycepin, that's the main compound. We want the most cordycepin and da-da-da-da. And I'm just like, a whole plethora of other things that are acting in conjunction that makes this more potent. So I think that we really need to start looking at things a little bit more. But that's the one thing where citizen science needs a little bit more of a booster. Unless you're in like a really nice community lab, a lot of us don't have access to analytical equipment to study compounds and things like that. So I think once we get more access to that, that'd be really cool.
That was something I was going to ask, how someone can get started doing citizen science from their own home, because I know a lot of people do feel that barrier of like, I don't have the equipment, I don't have the room, and maybe, and it sounds like what you're saying, that is a very real barrier. Like, you're going to be limited in what you can do because the machines, the devices, the testing, it all costs money. I mean, it's expensive equipment.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we work as a community. I mean, I really am a proponent of community labs like Counterculture and Biotech Without Borders. I mean, I know they just shut down, but like Boston has a community lab. I can't remember what it's called. Baltimore does have one as well. Unfamiliar with that one. But I think that's where we can really get more of that work done. But a lot of this equipment, like there's colleges auctioning off stuff all the time. Like I got my microscope from a local community college, and like HEPA filters you can get on auctions. So there's a lot of things you can get really cheap. A lot of the DNA equipments, there are companies that are making it more affordable. The Odin is a great company for getting used laboratory equipment.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
key for people to know then. I mean, that site, the Odin, obviously we'll put links to all this good stuff. People watch your local colleges and local, labs. I mean, is that showing up on Craigslist, that kind of thing, where you can just search for the equipment?
There's a couple auction websites that are specific for that, and I don't know if you have any friends that do dumpster diving. You can always go check, but sometimes they just throw it away. But yeah, a lot of times it ends up on like Craigslist, or there's like specialty like auction sites, which I can't recall off the top of my head.
There are ways that you can get equipment. You just get creative, look at some of the sites, the resources online. I mean, we find everything else on the internet. It only makes sense when we find that kind of equipment. And actually, when you talk about universities throwing stuff out, my dad was a biology professor for a long time at University of Maryland. He told me the same thing. They do throw out a ton of equipment. If people are really into citizen science and want to do microscopy or whatever work you do, it doesn't hurt to ask your local university. And sometimes they have whole like storage sheds full of the stuff that they haven't thrown out yet. They don't know what to do with. Definitely worth your time in trying to see those things as resources to kind of enhance your own citizen science. I think people can engage in really meaningful work in their own home. And then I like the idea, it's like this for DNA sequencing, where you can isolate what you want to sequence and send it off. And they'll actually do that legwork for you that might be more complicated. So I think there's like an ecosystem that could develop around citizen science if you could kind of have people out on the ground doing stuff on their really small scale level, but then they have a resource they can go to kind of build it up and take it to the next level.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if anybody on their own or with a couple people in their community invested in spectrometry equipment, like liquid or gas, then they'd have a lot of work on their hands. There's so many mycologists and other people that are growing whatever that really want access to affordable analytics. So if a couple kids in Maryland or Oklahoma or whatever get some spectrometry equipment and put it in their garage and learn how to use it, they'll be in good business for quite some time,
Follow Will's blueprint. Try to do something that people need that no one's doing yet.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I wanted to circle back a little bit on finding them in the wild. What's that like? Because I've never found cordyceps in the wild. How do you see them? Is there some rhyme or reason to finding these things? Or is it just they grow where other mushrooms might grow? They like the same habitat. How are you finding these things in the wild?
I think learning about the insect is really helpful. I personally don't know as much about the insects, and probably gonna do it this year is get a fresh specimen and do the DNA on the shell of the insect if it's still viable, to figure out what species they are. I know one of them is an oakworm moth, so they're definitely around oak trees. But we find them in a lot of boggy areas near moving water. Sometimes not at all near moving water, but we find more near moving water. Places where there's a lot of like dry creek beds where the water moves when it rains really hard. A lot of mossy areas. We find a lot of them in like oak hemlock mixed forest here. Mm-hmm. I know they're not as abundant on the West Coast for some whatever reason. Maybe people just don't know where to look for them yet.
Well, that was going to be my selfish question was, have you heard about them on the West Coast? Do you want to help me out?
They're in one of the West Coast books in your area in Northern California. People have found Militaris before. I don't know. Maybe I need to go out there and help. Yeah, it takes an eye, man. You like gotta like get ready. Like you have to prepare your brain to see them. And it's kind of like you're going to start dreaming you're finding cordyceps and you're like, I don't know, maybe I need to put a cordyceps on my arm right there just to like tattoo it so I can like reference, all right, this is the color I'm looking for.
You're training your eye while you're out in the woods.
Yeah, because you got to walk around the woods and then you start noticing anything that's like not green or brown.
Right.
Like, oh, this piece of trash. I end up picking up like mad random pieces of trash because they're like different, but then you start to see like the orange color. But yeah, just look at the ground, look for mossy areas, like study them. You'll spend a lot of time not finding anything at first, but like once you get the knack for it, I'll go out on a good day and just fill a whole tackle box full of them,
That's crazy to me. And cordyceps illustrate beautifully one of those things I love about mushroom foraging. If you go out and forage, you can discover something new. Because in my reading about cordyceps, there are still like 120 plus species that have been found that haven't been really codified, at least in the West.
Yeah, I mean, I found 2 species just last year.
Yeah.
One person, just me, like that I couldn't figure out what the heck they were. One of them I called Cicadaceps, and I sent it to a bunch of people, but it was like some weird It wasn't even Cordyceps genus. There was no way it was Cordyceps genus, but it was like stroma coming out of a cicada. And so it wasn't like the Massospora. Like it was like some stromata forming Cordyceps type fungi growing from a cicada. And like when I saw it, I thought it was dried up old Militaris, and I wasn't gonna pick it. And I was like, it looks interesting. And I dug up, I'm like, yo, this is a whole different host. Like this is not Cordyceps
Wow.
Militaris. And the one I found was like thinner than a toothpick. It was just a bunch of them, and they were growing from these tiny little larvae. It was insane. I couldn't even barely take a picture of it. They were so thin.
All right, your eyes are trained. If you're seeing the little toothpicks in the forest on the baby larva, your eyes are dialed.
You know how many little like ends of leaves that I pick up, or like little sticks and stuff I find? It's wild.
Are any of these other species that maybe aren't Militaris, are they showing promise in terms of not only just commercial viability in terms of yield, but are there any other cordyceps worth mentioning in terms of like medicinal properties or other properties?
Yeah, for sure. We say cordyceps is like a big blanket term for a lot of hypocreals type mushrooms.
How do they codify cordyceps? Because you're saying there are other things that can infest a host and still create similar looking fruit body structures.
Yeah, they're all part of like the same family. Cordyceps militaris is probably one of the only cordyceps that we actually work with, that we deal with. Like we have the classic Tibetan cordyceps, which is Ophiocordyceps, so it's not Cordyceps genus. I mean, a lot of the Talipocladium ophioglossoides, which is still hypocreals, but it makes a black stroma that grows from a truffle, sometimes brown.
Oh, whoa.
This one's really weird. The Talipocladium ophioglossoides has a lot of variation, and they all are identified as Talipocladium, which I really wanted to start doing the DNA on this year. They can be anywhere from like black completely with just white spore on the top to like brown with like almost like a cappy looking thing on the top. So they're really interesting. And I was able to cultivate those in vitro probably in like 2016, 2017.
Oh, wow.
And I had no information on anybody else doing that. Now Ryan Gates is growing them really nice in vitro. But they have a lot of benefits for prostate health, as well as like neurogenesis and neurological benefits similar to lion's mane. So that's like another nootropic type. And then there are some cordyceps that have like mycotoxins or potentially harmful compounds in it. So you shouldn't just like eat any cordyceps.
That's what I was reading. I was reading that some of them do have negative side effects.
Yeah, for sure. Like the capitatum, I can't remember because they keep changing the genus name on it. I think it was like Talipocladium capitatum or like Elaphiocordyceps capitatum or capitata. It has like a little club head and it grows on truffles. And that one, some folks I think in Michigan were doing research on it, and they told me like, don't eat those. Those could be potentially harmful. And like we still don't know what the Ophiocordyceps ravenelli, even though Reishi looked at them for cordycepin, like we didn't analyze them for potential mycotoxins. So her eating that was like, all right, I see you.
A little bit adventurous.
Yeah, a little adventurous. So, I mean, in China, they cultivate like 100 different types of cordyceps.
Wow.
So
well, just
or something like that. Yeah.
I think everyone has a similar mental image of a cordyceps. So, in my brief reading of this before our interview, I was just blown away by how many different kinds there are, how many are unexplored. So, just that expanded umbrella of family that we call cordyceps has a lot of work to be done in exploring it and really seeing the maximal benefits that we can get out of it. If you're interested all in cordyceps, get into it, because we're just getting going. I mean, you could say that about mycology in general, of course, but especially something like cordyceps is such a novel organism that we're still kind of learning about. There's so much room for growth. Leaving cordyceps land, which is hard for me to do because I just want to pick your brain all about cordyceps. We'll find another time to do that. We've covered a lot about citizen science and kind of how people can empower themselves with a knowledge of natural sciences outside of an academic or institutional framework. And what gets me really excited is seeing people leverage that knowledge in a way that truly does improve their lives. And I see this potentiality for people to take this information and be able to bring it to maybe a civic level. The reason I think that is something I saw you doing. I think it was about the Chesapeake Bay, where you were doing some organizing to... I know, I'm going way back. I'm going back in the archives, man. Well, I'm from Maryland myself, so I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. So it was really interesting to see you taking some of this knowledge as someone who, has trained themselves and use it to argue for essentially civic betterment. That's huge. That's hugely empowering to be able to take that information and like really make positive change at a more systemic level. than just kind of growing your own medicine for yourself, which is great. If we can force the structures that kind of run our society to start making better decisions by us having this knowledge, like that is really empowering the citizen and taking science out of the domain of elite institutions and giving it back to the people.
That was an interesting time in my life. I think that was the whole system's approach to remediation of Chesapeake Bay watershed contamination.
That sounds
That I
right.
did with Dale Hendricks for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council when I was like 20 years old. That was wild. I was like, the Environmental Council's like, oh, we have to apply all these things. We have to talk to the citizens about how they can implement these different methods of like catching rainwater and like managing their land for da 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 da. And I'm just like, you guys are talking about how to talk to people about this, and I've already been talking to the people about this. Like,
Right, right.
people don't like institutions and organizations and companies coming in and like saying, we know what you need to do. It's better for somebody from the community, somebody that's relatable, to come in and be like, this is what we can do. It's a little bit more digestible that way. I don't know if you know, but like back then around that time, I like campaigned to run for mayor of the town I was living in.
Oh, yes, please. Let's put Will Padilla for mayor.
I think it's really important. I used to be very active in the borough council and the business and professionals group. And in the borough council, I was the youngest person in there by 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm just like, all you guys are complaining about the issues you have with our government and the issues you have with where you live. Yet none of you guys are here where you can actually make a difference. And like a lot of the topics at the council meetings were like, who's going to replace such and such? We're getting old. We got to retire. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, this is why we don't like what's going on where we live, because a lot of places around the country, the government is run by like older people with not the most ideal mindsets about what they want the world to be, you know? So I thought it was really important to get some like fresh blood in there, you know? I think that's one place where a lot of us don't go, where a lot of us are activists, a lot of us are out there complaining about what we want, but a lot of us aren't taking the necessary actions to implement what we want. We need people with these ideas in our government, like in our local government. We've already seen the power of local and state government with decriminalizing plants and like legalizing plants. If you go to California, all your products are going to say like, this contains something that might give you cancer. They only do that in California. Like, I don't know anywhere else they do that, you know? People are like, oh, California's so great. California's so great. It's because it's younger. It's because there's a lot of more like-minded people that are participating in the government there. That's something that I saw in Asheville, North Carolina. Like, there's a lot of younger blood in the government, a lot of people with the ideals that our generation are really looking for. And so there are places and there are pockets of the country where like people like us are participating in the government, but I think it's important that on like a national level that we all, or even an international level, that we all start participating in local politics.
Even if you don't win or become mayor, just by participating, you're kind of shifting the debate and bringing up topics that they might be leaving out, especially when we're talking about citizen science, like seeing this through the lens of environmentalism. A lot of people are disappointed with their local government's approach to environmentalism. Like, even if they want to do something about it, it's usually not like a holistic approach that people in that area might already do, like rainwater collection or like bioremediation, making healthier soil. Those somehow aren't in their solution set because maybe they just don't have that knowledge. And so they're looking for like ham-fisted approach to trying to deal with these problems through like taxes or like some other thing that won't really fix the underlying issues. Maybe we have to get more people passionate about citizen science, about understanding the natural systems and how we can better work with them. And then we'll start seeing that mindset reflected in the actual bodies that govern our lives. Why isn't it happening? And maybe it is because we don't want to really engage with those institutions. We see those structures as like something of a bygone era that doesn't really suit our needs or like is something that we can oppose. And maybe we should be more focused on like inoculating them and taking them over.
The solution is usually found within the problem. You want to break it down, you got to be part of it first.
When I hear you talk about permaculture, when I hear you talk about systems thinking on a personal level and then a little bit bigger community level, is that something that if applied across a broad enough area, do you see that as being something that would change the planet for the better?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I started my business off of a trip that I had. The distillation of the experience was that symbiosis or homeostasis will not be achieved without symbiosis with local systems, both ecological systems and social systems. that's when I developed mycosymbiotics, but I also developed it around this idea that if I want to find homeostasis, if I want to find balance in my life, I need to manage a symbiosis with my ecology. I need to figure out how I can move through my ecosystems and collect the resources I need and also give back to it. And also how I can move through my social settings, collect the resources I need and give back to it. And in doing that, I was able to like learn how to forage. I had an abundance of mushrooms and all these things. I was able to trade those and barter with my local community. They started to support me. They started to host my workshops. People started to participate in it. And we have a really nice community out here in central Pennsylvania. And I found all my needs met where I was. And at that point, I realized that that exemplary form of living that I was living through, what I was doing, people were interested in it. And they're like, come to my community and teach me about what you're doing. And I started to realize that my local systems became larger. Like my local systems weren't just around me anymore. My local systems became the United States of America. Like I've been in the deserts of our country. I've been in the rainforests of our country. I've been in the Pacific Northwest. I've been in the subtropical Floridian, the northeastern New England. Like I can go anywhere in this country and be able to find food, find community, and find myself in a balance. And I've seen that now it's starting to bounce me into other countries, which I had a lot of more international travels planned for this year that have been halted, which is fine. I think that that's a big part of how this spreads. And like, I don't think that everybody needs to be on this national and global system, like mycelium transfer moving all over the place. Like, I think it is important for some people to like stay rooted where they are. For those people that can find that balance and to be able to move and share those ideas from their community with the broader system, I think that's where we'll start to see a lot more of these changes implemented. The stories that I've brought back from my community of the places I've been to, because like a lot of people like are getting depressed. We're so far gone, like the earth is going to go to crap. People don't care enough and da 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 da. But I'm like, yo, I've been all around this country, and every single place I go, I meet a whole horde of people that care about the right things, that are out there actively doing what we need to get done to make this world a better place. So I have hope, realizing that we are all one, sharing what we have from the different parts of this global brain, I think is really critical to what we want to see happen.
And I think the natural byproduct of that is more freedom, more positive change. You see communities trending toward principles and ways of living that are more beneficial, are more in symbiosis with the local ecology, maybe the greater community they fit into. We are faced with a lot of big issues, and instead of thinking, oh, we need to maybe tear it all down, or how do we dismantle government or corporations to a point where they're not doing things that are harmful to us or aren't in our best interest, almost like you can't focus on that side and you need to grow the alternative. And that's why I see a lot of people who get into this information, back to the land, permaculture ways of thinking, citizen science studies of mycology or phycology like you do with growing algae. I know a lot of people now into these things from Vermont out here to California. And every time you see people take hold of those principles and really pursue it, the natural byproduct is more freedom and a better relationship that they have with their family than their local community. And it kind of goes outward. Not only is it pursuing a passion, it's something you'll find immensely satisfying, but when we talk about ways to really make changes on this planet, the change ends up being the byproduct, I see, of just pursuing this way of life. Start empowering yourself with teaching yourself science, start empowering yourself to have a better relationship with the natural world, to grow things, to understand ecological systems better. People see their own lives improve as they pursue and spread this information. And then hearing your story about being in symbiosis makes all the sense in the world and verbalizes it really well.
Right on. Thanks, man.
There's another big issue I wanted to bring up. I don't know if it's just in the region I live in, but we've talked about citizen science. We've talked about, the study of mycology, self-taught science. And it's something that I've noticed being a member of several mycology clubs and citizen science clubs here out in the Bay is the lack of POC representation. And it's something that gets brought up at these meetings. Like, why is this the case? Maybe I'm just seeing it through my own lens, or maybe it's this area or something. Do you see that there is a lack of POC representation in citizen science and kind of the study of mycology and really interaction with the natural world in the way we're talking about?
Yeah, and I've been starting to see it change over the years too. When I first started, I was like, usually the youngest and the only person of color at any events that I was going to. A lot of it is like, how do we even get people of color interested in things like this? I mean, like when I go down south, there's a lot of POC farmers and stuff like that. But a lot of people of color in the United States, the majority of them are living in more social or lower socioeconomic areas where they don't have as much access to education to even learn to care about these kinds of things. A lot of people are living in areas where there's not a lot of healthy food options, which I bring that up because if you're not eating good, how are you supposed to think about stuff? You know, like,
Right.
so there's a lot of things that kind of are deterrents of it. One of the big things I think is a lot of these events are in places that are not easy to access. Some of the mushroom clubs that I go to, they're in the inner city, which I really appreciate because then people can utilize public transportation to get there. But a lot of these conferences and festivals are out in like crazy resorts in the mountains somewhere. And it's like, how are you even supposed to get, how are people supposed to even get here? You know, like I've definitely been racially profiled on my way into these wealthier areas to go to these events at these resorts where it's majority of wealthy people that go for leisure, you know. I think bringing these events closer to the city, making it cool, making it sexy, that's been a big part of it. Not only do I like do just my science, I like denied myself of my music for a long time because I'm like, I got to be serious about my science. But like I started doing my music too, and that brings in a whole different group of people that probably wouldn't care about this stuff otherwise.
Right.
My festival that I started, MycoSymbiotics Mushroom and Arts Festival. If it was just a mushroom festival, it would be just mushroom people.
Right.
We have live art, we have live painting, we have stuff for kids, we have music every night. Those are kind of things that will start to draw in another crowd. Like I think it was like the second or third year I started doing I started personally doing rap performances at the festival, but I also started having local like rap and hip hop artists come in, and they brought in a whole different crowd of people that, oh, we came for the music, but like this stuff looks kind of cool. Like what's up with this mushroom stuff? I found that to be really beneficial. And I was really inspired. I went to this permaculture action day in Atlanta on this little urban farm. They had live music throughout the day, and at night they had a really popular artist, Rory, came out and did a performance later in the evening, and I performed there. So like not only were we teaching people about permaculture and gardening and mushrooms, but we were also like participating in the culture of our country.
Yeah.
People are receptive to music. People are receptive to fashion. People are receptive to whatever our society has deemed to be cool. And even if it's not something that you entirely agree with, those ideals of our culture, I think it's important not to just deny that that is a part of our culture and actually incorporate it into the things that we're doing. So I found by implementing art and different cultural aspects beyond just the science has been one of the most beneficial ways to get other people involved, especially people of color. You have to be relatable first.
If the goal is to get as many people aware of these principles and this information as possible so they can integrate it in their lives, and then we'll see this like bigger systemic change flowing out of that, then you got to participate in the cultural conversation to get people drawn into it. Especially when you're talking about people who are in socioeconomically marginalized areas, who are in hyper-urbanized areas, they can probably make use of this knowledge more than anyone. It's going to affect their life directly, like growing their own healthy food with actual nutrition, growing their own medicines that don't have nasty side effects or aren't putting them in like a dumbed down state. These are the people that need it the most. So I think it is really important to try to make sure that when events, it's not necessarily that everyone's trying to be exclusive, but it's like having a mind toward inclusivity. What can we do to try to make sure we're drawing in everyone into this thing, because everyone needs this knowledge?
Yeah, 100%. I'm with you there. Yeah, I mean, if you ever even listen to some of the music that I make, there's a good flow and a good beat to get people listening to it. But if you listen to the lyrics, it's like turning on some things, you know, it's like,
It's
throwing
super
some
conscious
ideas at you. Yeah, you know?
Yeah, my partner and I have listened to a bunch of your music, and well, this is actually super woke. Like now that I'm actually listening to it, this is insane. It sounds like what you're saying is the key to building even a bigger mass in the POC community is, yeah, you got to tie it into things people are already interested in, because a lot of the science we're talking about has been the domain of an institutionalized and exclusive culture in some ways. So citizen science is the start of people taking that back, and now we need to like make sure the citizen science is as inclusive as it can be to everyone who should be part of this.
A couple of years ago, I was teaching about mushrooms for some elementary school kids with behavioral issues. Like they were all put into a separate class because their behavioral issues were keeping them from being part of the regular structure. And teach about the mushrooms, and a couple kids were interested. There's one kid just sitting in the back with his arms crossed, and like I asked if they had questions, and the kid in the back was like, "Why should I care about this?" And these are all POC children, and he's like, "Why should I care about any of this? This is like nerd stuff." I was like, "Well, here's why you should care about it, because I'm making money. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm doing this,
Yeah.
and I'm getting that bread. I'm getting that cheddar. And like he was like, "Oh, you can make money doing this?" And I was like, "Yeah, and it's cool. Like nobody's gonna bother me. Like this is good work. It's good, honest work. Growing my product. I'm selling my product, and I'm making my money. I know the kids at that school were like, they're growing up around drug dealing. They know. I can't say that kind of stuff. But this was back when I was super spun. Like I was tripped out all the time. I was like walking around barefoot. Like didn't care what I looked like. I looked like a homeless wreck. I gave up a big part of my identity in transitioning into learning these things. I was like, this culture is terrible. This is a parasitic, terrible culture. Like, I'm going to deny all of the culture that I was brought up on. And I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I like hip hop music. I like streetwear. I like street fashion.
Yeah.
And doing that, if I was to go back to those kids and they saw me wearing like whatever street fashion, they're like, maybe I should listen.
When you show that example of having done the work and who you're like choosing to be and who you're embodying, it gives people permission to do that and gives them like an easier blueprint to follow, I guess, an easier way to visualize themselves. It's interesting to hear your opinion and maybe how we can help grow that community. And it's probably just by more and more people getting into it. And I think there are ways maybe we can be even more inclusive. Maybe that is just blending it with arts, cultural things that draw people in and give people more of a place to relate.
Yeah. I think the fact that these discussions are being had is proof that we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So rounding things out, I want to get into a little bit of like the future of MycoSymbiotics, MycoFest, the amazing mushroom festival, what that's all about, if it's still happening in the age of infinite quarantine, what's going on with the company and events coming up.
So the company, I don't know which direction it's going to be going in really. And it took me a while to realize that I'm not a businessman.
It doesn't always have to be that way.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine with making enough to get by and putting some savings away for my kid, but teaching and research is more of where I'd like to be focused. I'm just going to continue my research. I think I'm going to be moving here somewhere around Pennsylvania in the next few months, setting up my lab again and maybe a small grow space for research and for teaching. Over the past couple of years, since I left North Carolina, all of my gourmet medicinal grows have been for research and for demos. So I just set up a basic thing where I can do my research, and then when I teach classes, I can use as a demonstration for cultivation and stuff like that. So I'm probably going to set up another demo research site where I'm going to spend a lot of time researching cordyceps probably mostly, and other cool mushrooms that I'm really interested in that don't have as much research done on them. As far as MycoSymbiotics goes, I mean, I'm working on some opportunities to expand the farm out a little bit. I do sell a lot of mushrooms wholesale, mostly to Cognitive Function, which is a sister company that produces different nutraceutical products. And I do sell wholesale to some other companies. But I think in the next year, as far as the company goes, I might just get some more business savvy people to help me out as I set up a larger grow. We've been working on this hive mind cooperative business. I mean, I've taught thousands of people how to cultivate mushrooms at this point, and I want to provide an outlet for them. We want to see more access to North American grown mushrooms. Although there are companies, in particular Namex, that does have quality sourcing of mushrooms from China. I'm not a big proponent in supporting use of Chinese mushrooms in American products, especially when the companies aren't telling you that that's where the mushrooms are coming from. I think that the chain of custody is a little bit diluted over there. So we're working on developing a co-op that we keep a clear chain of custody of where these mushrooms are grown, who they're grown by, what they were grown on, and supply wholesale dried bulk gourmet medicinal mushrooms for companies that are trying to make all these different products, because right now there isn't really a North American option for that. So we've been in the process of getting that all put together. So we're definitely just putting the word out now, trying to get more people interested in that. And that's probably what the grow space will be for, is cultivating a large amount of mushrooms for wholesale and maybe just fill a couple local restaurant clients that have really been supportive of my work over the past 5-6 years. And then MycoFest, for now, it's still on until we get note that we can't do it. It's going to be on for this year. We're super excited about it. It's like 130 acres on the Susquehanna River, lots of wooded area, lodges, cabins, communal cabins, private cabins, a lot of space for camping. We have a lot of good teachers lined up. So as long as like we're able to, people are able to travel and we're able to do it, MycoFest is still on. And this will be the 6th annual. Every year happens first weekend of August. This year it'd be July 31st to August 2nd. 3 days, camping, food's included. This year we're not doing lunch, so it'll just be breakfast and dinner included. There'll be food trucks for lunch. Camping's included in base ticket price. And yeah, just 3 days nerding out, lots of different teachers from around the world, live music every night, art being done through the day, lots of vendors. It's really just a lot of fun, good place, family-oriented event to nerd out at and have a good time meeting like-minded people. So that's on as long as we can still do it. Future stuff, I mean, I don't want to delve in too much. I've really learned to stop talking about things that I'm going to do before I do them, because there's a lot of people out there that have more access to resources than I do that really love to just
snipe your ideas.
Yeah. So I've been more careful about just doing things first before I talk about it.
Sure.
So, just a lot more research come on the way.
And there's power in that too. There's power in like keeping things low key until it's already online. And as anyone who's part of a startup knows, you kind of do have to run silent for a lot of the best ideas and just keep it tight with your team and build it out and then start spreading the word when it's too late for someone to try to like pop up and do the same thing. I think your idea of starting the co-op of North American producers, where you guys are producing, but then you're also empowering decentralized network of other producers. And I see it as a huge way for the US to grab a lot of economic benefit right now, because medicinal mushrooms are exploding. And there are plenty of places around this country where you could grow medicinal mushrooms. And since a lot of that demand centers here, there should be no reason why we can't take advantage of that and like have it benefit the communities that the people who are using it actually live in. I'm excited to hear about that. And they better let us have travel rights and go, because I didn't get to go to MycoFest last year. Now I really want to go because I have family over there in Maryland. So
it's like a shining light at the end of the tunnel for me right now. I'm just like, all right, end quarantine, MycoFest, let's go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know you have a son. I see Leo on all your posts. He's awesome. What has it been like being able to share this knowledge with him? Has he been really into this? Does he love going out hunting mushrooms, being in the lab? Is this something you're kind of passing down?
Yeah, I mean, he's seen the lab, and like I'll let him watch me do stuff down there. Sometimes he's watched me do a DNA extraction, and he's watched me do culturing of mushrooms. But he really loves going out and looking for mushrooms with me. He gets so excited when he finds stuff before I do, and he oftentimes finds stuff that I'm passing over. Like I'm out there looking for like gourmet and medicinal, and he's out there looking for everything. Like, he can see better than I can, so he finds stuff. Like I got 20 plus years of looking at a screen, he's fine.
Yeah.
He can see things better than me. Last year he found a whole patch of trumpets that I was literally walking on, and black trumpets. And he's like, "Why are you stepping on them?" Like, I was like, what am I stepping on? He's like, "The black trumpets, Papa." And he's like showing me all of it. And he's slowly but surely capable of identifying edible mushrooms and stuff. He knows not to put it in his mouth unless I told him what it is first. He's getting really good at it. He can identify more plants and mushrooms than most adults can. I'm really happy about that, and he seems to really enjoy it, and he loves getting outside. So I think there's a really good balance there, because he gets his time inside where he plays with his toys, he plays video games, and he does his whole school, and he has like both of these aspects of life, which I really didn't have growing up. So I personally believe that he knows more than I could even ever understand. He's been more acclimated to natural patterns since he was born. We've been taking him out in the forest. His perspective on this is something unique and something that I'm excited to see mature. I really am excited to see who he becomes as a person, with having all these experiences behind him.
I am always interested to hear people like sharing this with the next generation. This next generation is going to grow up with this information and really be able to like take it so much further. And I have now 2 nieces that one's 2 years old and one's like 6 weeks old. And I'm really hoping to be able to like share this with them and take them out into the woods and get them more acclimated to the natural world. As we kind of go more technotronic in one direction, I think we're going to have to really focus on balancing it out.
hopefully they'll find balance within themselves, but eventually they're going to grow up and become their own person so they can take what they learned and run with it or do something else. But either way, I think it's just important for them to have that and know, like, just have that knowledge. Like, I just think whatever they do with it in their own life, that's what they do. But like, just know that they have that is important.
You live on this planet, you may as well understand the ecological and natural systems. Like, that's such an important thing to introduce kids to. Well, I guess as wrapping things up, tell us where to find you. Where can people get a hold of you?
Apex Grow on YouTube. I should probably do more videos now that I'm stuck at home and stuff. So, William Padilla-Brown on Facebook, MycoSymbiotics on Instagram. If you're interested in the music, check out It's Cosmic Music. mycoshop.net if you want to buy any cultures, mycosymbiotics.net if you want to check on the calendar or any updates or anything like that with the whole business. If you want to buy products that utilize my mushrooms, check out cognitivefunction.net. I'm most active on Instagram. If you want to hit me up or shoot me a DM, I might not answer all your questions, but I typically do respond. So,
well, we're going to link up all those awesome things in the show notes. And then a couple final thoughts. And for this question, I might shut off cordyceps. I might say that's not an option, but just a mushroom that you really are stoked about right now and why. It doesn't have to be a favorite or anything, just a mushroom that's really interesting right now. Why?
Globifomes groviolens. I've been talking about this for a while. There's like no research on it at all. And it's beautiful and it tastes good as a tea. It's a polypore. It's cultivatable. So I think that we need to really look at this mushroom. I think that it has a lot of potential. I think that if it does have, it already has polysaccharides, so it at least can do immunomodulating benefit, or at least has immunomodulatory benefits. But I think that this mushroom is hosting a lot of medicinal benefits that we have no idea about, and we can grow it, and it tastes good. So like, what the heck are we not researching this mushroom for?
All right, we might need to cut that out of the podcast. That's like top secret. I don't want to run away with that.
And I want somebody to run away with it.
You're like, I'm putting it out there. I want to see that. And then your whole body of work. I mean, you've done a lot of different things that we've kind of scratched the surface on. Like, what's lasting impact you hope your work has?
To be you, and go all into it. Be the most you can be. Don't be afraid. Like, don't be embarrassed. Break your cultural programming that is inhibiting you from being the most you. And I think once you start to get that trickle of self, you're going to be thirsty for more. That's where I am in my life right now. Like, I do a lot of this research and I do a lot of this work for the community and for the people. But at the end of the day, I'm a very selfish individual, and I'm doing this to figure out who the heck I am. Like, I'm doing this work to further develop the understanding of myself. I hope that everybody can get to that point where like they're just thirsty for who they are on multiple levels and multiple dimensions of reality, and do whatever it takes to figure out what that is. Because when you really get that full hydration of self is when you can do the most incredible things for the world. So I really hope that everybody can get their thirst quenched.
I love that. It is addicting. And you know what? Everyone else's part is already taken. So you got to really come into your own. You know, it's not a dress rehearsal. You got to come into your own part and figure out what you really want to contribute. That's beautiful, man. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that piece of wisdom. And thank you for being so generous with your time and providing really thoughtful answers. And it's been a pleasure.